So the session is already recorded. Once again, good afternoon, everyone. I welcome all of you to Practical Research 1, which by description is for qualitative research. This subject or the subject research in itself is one that is not actually welcomed with so much excitement by so many students. That's one thing, that's one impression that I've already learned to accept myself. Not everyone, not every student likes the thought of doing research. With the kind of research that perhaps I request of students, not just request, but I require for students to do. But the thing is, perhaps it's the academic experience of research that students could not fully appreciate. But I tell you, people, I tell you, when you actually practice research as a how do I say it, as a professional field, you'd find that research is one that's actually fulfilling or satisfying. In fact, you could earn so much from research. You could earn a lot from this experience. I've been into this is a sharing that I've had with so many of my research students, with so many of my research classes, and I would opt to have this shared. I would still keep on sharing this experience because I'd like to concretize to everyone that by doing research, you could actually earn. Take for instance what happened in 2017. I didn't have a work for the entire summer period, and so my tita helped me, and she informed me that there is a research that needs to be done with a resettlement site that's found in Panglao. You should know that the airport that we have now in Panglao was once occupied by so many residents. That land area was once occupied by so many residents who were relocated, who have been relocated in Tawala. In the process of relocating them, these residents have actually been subjects of a research to know how their lives have become after having been relocated. So I worked as a researcher under the provincial government of Bohol, and then what I did was to distribute questionnaires to people and ask them of how they are, what their means of livelihood are, what they did with the amount of money that they received as payment for the lot that they occupied in the airport, and so on. I actually worked for 10 days as a researcher. And guess what? I was paid 2,000 pesos for every day that I worked as a researcher. So how much will that be in the span of 10 days? 20,000. And I managed to finish my work in less than 10 days. Yet I still earned the amount of 20,000. Daniel Baluran, the brother of Alay, was actually requested. Daniel knows this. I requested him to help me in that research. I turned down his willingness to help me because he wanted to have a 50-50 share of my profit, of my income. At that time, I wanted to have a PA or a personal assistant to help me work with research. With the kind of sharing that Daniel proposed, I turned it down, and then I realized that the work is one that I could just actually manage. So that happened to me in 2017. Came 2018. In 2018, the same resettlement site was in need of another research. There was like a part two of that research, which was like for 1 week only, 7 days, and from there I got a payment of 10,000 pesos. Thankfully, I prepared. In when I was in HNU for 2 years, I sat as a member of the panel as a panelist, and I was given a form of payment for my professional fee as a panelist, which is still related to research. During the summer, like this summer, there were at least 3 or 4 research groups who had approached me and asked for my assistance in the technicalities of the research, where I also earned some form of professional payment. And again, this is what I meant earlier when I said that once you make research a part of your professional practice, you could actually earn from it. Maybe again, it's this academic experience of research that drives students away from eventually liking the activity itself. I might have mentioned it last week, but let me reiterate that this time. When I was in college, English 19, or which basically that's research, is one subject that I actually looked forward to taking in that semester. And when I had it for that semester, I did not end up being frustrated. It was really an experience worth my excitement and time. Much, much probably due to the fact that it was handled by a teacher who did not actually disappoint us, who was so good in the teaching of the subject. I'd like to invite you to put your biases aside towards what you've heard of research from other people. Or maybe you might have seen students when the setup was still in a face-to-face scenario, you might have seen students go through that harsh experience or a gruesome experience of finishing their research. Put those aside. I'd like you to embrace this subject as though you are free of any impression that you've heard from people before. If you should have an impression of the subject, let it come from you, as you are the person who is going to be part in this journey. For this semester, we will have PR1, which yields an output that is qualitative in nature. For the second semester, we will have quantitative research, and that's the output of practical research 2 or PR2. When you reach grade 12, you will have research project, which is another research subject. That's for the first semester. In the second semester, if God wills that I still be your research teacher, then in the second semester when you're in grade 12, you will have another research subject which is called a capstone subject. The batch of Raisa ended up doing three research papers in one, no, in their entire senior high school life. One which is not the same in terms of the experience of students from other schools. In fact, at one point, I thought that when Raisa placed it as a story in her Facebook account, I thought that she was kind of ridiculing the doing of three researches in 2 school years. But Raisa actually told me that she is so much thankful that that's her experience, because that experience of hers made her stand out from the other students who are at the same age bracket as she does, and these other students are studying in other schools. She was looking for something that would make her distinct from the rest of the other students. That experience of research is one that made her stand out. In this journey, expect, of course, that there will be plenty of stumbling along the way. When I say stumbling, we should expect that what we'll be able to create is not a perfect output right away. I mean, that's what I am here for. If you manage to make an output which you feel happens to be already flawless, that's where I'll come in to look for the flaws of your work. And that is, please do not look at it negatively. Why will I look at the flaws of your work? Because I want your work to be improved and improved and improved. When I had my proposal in 2020, May 14, 2020, for a master's degree, I thought that my chapter 1 is already a perfect chapter 1. Because when I read it, it felt as though the work is already good. Like, it is really, really good. That's what I thought. But when the panelists saw my work, that's when I realized that I only knew so much of my own research paper. Thanks to the panelists, I found the many areas where I could improve my work. And that's what I plan to do with your researches. That's where I'll come in to look at the many angles where your research paper can be improved. It might come out as though when we do the giving of corrections and feedback and comments, It might come out as though my voice is scolding you. Please let me clear that out. I am not scolding anybody at that point. I promise you, I am not mad at anyone. In fact, how I carried myself during that critiquing time is only good for that critiquing time. I promise you, I will never take it against you. But I hope that we'll agree in the condition that when I give the comments, you should also work on the comments. When it is already commented that the work be done this way, let it be done that way. In fact, no, when you simply follow the comments and the corrections I provide, I would not hesitate to give a perfect score to your outputs. That's what happened to the research of the grade 12 batch last year. Their capstone researches were done individually, and then they simply followed what my corrections were. Like if I tell them to remove one part to replace it with a word or with a line that says this, they did so. And as the scores were given, I did not hesitate to give them that's the perfect score which they deserve because they already did what my eyes wanted to see in their work. If you manage to do that, again, I would not hesitate to give you the perfect score that you deserve. And I think that's a fair trade. I mean, what are my corrections for if you do not follow them? What are my corrections for if you do not comply with the corrections and comments? But it also there might also be occasions when you'd say, sir, at this point, I'll have to stick to what I placed in my manuscript because this is what the authority really said about it. In that manner, I will not impose myself over your work. I'll respect what that person said about your research. Take for instance, I'll tell Honey Claire, please remove that paragraph. And then Honey Claire will tell me, or a group mate of Honey Claire will tell me, sir, let's assume that Honey Claire and Chelsea belong to a group. Chelsea will say, sir, we will not remove that paragraph, sir, because according to someone's research, the idea in that paragraph really needs to go with the idea in the previous paragraph. If that's the explanation, then I will not impose myself on the work of Chelsea and Honey Claire. I will accept their decision because it's what makes their paper good. Don't worry, I will not be too imposing of myself over your work. I'll give due consideration and high regard towards what you feel is right and what I also feel is right towards your work. Questions so far before we proceed with the discussion? Questions? Don't worry again, we are together in this journey. We can do this. We can do this. I think we can do this. Let's start. I'll share a screen with you to proceed with the discussion of lesson 1. Using a fork from a tree or a bark from a tree. Can you see the... So the cell theory has 3 major postulates. There. Can you try saying something? Like, I'd like to request... Alay, can you say something, Alay? It is found in your module. But in your module, that is the arrangement, exactly, the arrangement. Just to check on your audio. Is the arrangement that is found in your module. Okay, it's fine. Thank you, Alay. I hope everybody could see this PowerPoint presentation. The arrangement in the module starts with the cell is the basic. I could already hear you, Alay. No, but just don't mind if the... Let us start with defining research. So again, research by etymology is of French origin. The word, I am just not really sure how to pronounce the word. I'm afraid of pronouncing this word now because the session is video recorded. I would not want my followers to unsubscribe if they realize that my pronunciation is incorrect. But what's important here is the spelling of the word is right. So we spell it as Rechercher. By the way, it's in your module. This is in your module. What does this word mean? This French word means to search after or investigate. Again, please consider that this slide shows you the etymological definition of the word research. Thus, if I ask you how research is etymologically defined, you should say that research comes from the French word rechercher, which means to search after or investigate. Do not just say the etymological definition of research is to search after or investigate. Again, if you are told to define the term etymologically, then include the etymological expression, the one which is of French origin. And then you provide the meaning of that French term as well. So again, etymologically speaking, the word research is taken from the French word recherche. It's Rechercher, which means to search after or investigate. And this is what we basically do when we are actually doing research. We are either searching for information from somewhere or that we're trying to investigate on why a particular event has occurred, why certain phenomena around us are basically occurring. And so we do some research. But more than that, what is research? Research is a patient investigation. Why is it a patient investigation? Let me start with this element of the definition. And I think it's not anymore in your module because your module is just, sorry, this definition is taken in just one sentence. So allow me to provide the discussion. Research is taken as a patient investigation because it is an undertaking that takes time. It deals with so much time. When people do research, when they really give justice to what research is supposedly is, then it's one that cannot just be finished in one night, in 2 nights or 3. Sometimes, well-invested and well-made researches would take years to finish. That is why there are also short-term researches and longitudinal researches available. When people do dissertations, those who are doing doctorate degrees would require like a year or 2 to finish just one research. Students who would really wish to accomplish a research which is worth publishing would most probably take several months to accomplish that work. And that would require a lot of patience for the researchers. Also, patience is one thing that we try to exhibit as researchers because sometimes what we hope to find in our research would not actually jive with what came out from the gathering of the data. When we do research, sometimes we have expectations. We have hopes of what we could discover or what we could identify or determine. Yet, things don't always go the way we planned them. Sometimes these expectations and hopes aren't met. And so what do? Do we just give up? Or while we are gathering some data, what if while gathering some data, it started to rain so heavily, yet you had to go to a farther location to gather your data. What should you do? Will that mean that you should give up? That will now require a lot of patience from the researcher. You tried to give your questionnaire to someone, and then the questionnaire wasn't returned right away back to you. What will you do? Will you ignore that person from your list of participants? If you do, that's quite unethical on your end because you already included that person as a participant in your research. You need to really include that person then. Patience is the key once again. Next, it is also a systematic investigation. Research is an activity that dwells in a process. There is a process that you need to follow when you do research. It's not as easy as jumping from one decision to another, ignoring the right steps and procedures. Because if you do, you might end up with a work that does not have a valid and reliable data and presentation, or you might end up with a write up with a paper that cannot be accepted by those who belong to the research community. So, as someone who tries to do that kind of undertaking, who wants to do research, the system, the procedures, the steps that go along with this activity should be followed by the researcher. Lastly, it is a careful investigation. Why is it a careful investigation? Research deals with data. It does. Data could be numeric, descriptive, whatever. But there is this pool of data that the researcher holds in his or her hand, which could not and must not be tampered with, just so expectations can be met, just so hopes can be achieved. Whatever your data are, deal with it. You need to exercise so much care with the data that you possess, because that data is what yields a particular interpretation and analysis. Altogether, this research is once again a patient, systematic, and careful investigation undertaken to determine or establish facts and or relationships. Please take note of this longer and I believe a more complete definition of what research is. This definition applies either to practical research 1 or practical research 2, be it an experimental research, a non-experimental research, whatever. For as long as it is really a research and we are giving justice to the name of research, then this definition is one that applies well. Next, here's another definition of research. It is seen as a scientific investigation. It tries to investigate a phenomena. Go. Thank you. Go, Mark. This is a scientific investigation. Oh, sorry. This is a scientific investigation which includes a collection, presentation, analysis, and interpretation of facts that line an individual's speculation with reality. So then again, we have a person here who has developed some form of impressions, perceptions, and notions towards reality. And in order to justify the existence of that reality, that person collects information and presents that information in some way. The presentation will be analyzed and interpreted. That interpretation eventually yields a conclusion which that researcher hopes to jive with the reality that he or she has thought of. Let me go back to the previous slide. By the way, Mark, you could actually find that definition in your module. The module, don't you have the module yet? Modules were distributed this morning and the module contains that definition of research. Anyway, if you wish to see it in the previous slide, here it is. For a while. Here it is. Once again, research. The module is a paper. Didn't you request someone to get the module? Excuse me for a while, Mark. I'll have to talk to your advisor. And for the meantime, Mark, you might want to copy the definition that you could see on the screen right now on the slide. Excuse me, Sir Jeff. This one is the Johnson. This microscope is the Johnson microscope. Has no one come to get the module of Mark Tampos? No one comes to get the module. Okay, that's why he's asking of what a module is. Can you contact anyone, the mother or the tito? That kuya. Okay, he wants to know how does it look? Nga na naman siya, how does it look like? What is a module? Mark, I've already talked with your class advisor and he told me that he's going to contact someone there at home, someone who will come to school this afternoon to get the module for you. So perhaps I could proceed now to the next slide. Red, is it all right, Mark, that we proceed now to the next slide? Anyway, Mark, you'll be able to have a copy of that. You can actually have a copy of this later on when you could actually see this one later on in the module that your, I think, is that probably your kuya? When your kuya comes to school to get your module for you, don't worry, the definition is there. This statement is there. To those who already have the module, I hope you have found this definition in that copy. It's in the second sentence of the first paragraph. Any questions so far regarding the definition of research? Yes? Yes, Mark. If you look at your module, by the time that you get your module later on, you could find this sentence in the second sentence of the first paragraph in your module. Your module is actually a piece of paper. Don't worry, Mark. Don't worry, Mark, because later on, someone will come to school to get your module for you. That person will go to your house or will return to your house and will give you the modules, the copies of the modules that you need to have for this subject or for all of your subjects this week. There are available copies of your lessons for this week. They are placed on printed papers. They are printed on papers for you to have and read at home. Okay. As for the others, we have some question regarding the definition of research. Any question regarding the definition of research? By the way, please do not be surprised once again if you do not find any set of FTs after my modules because sometimes I provide them, sometimes I don't. And here's the thing. If our discussion isn't going to be finished in one meeting, then expect that its continuation be done on the following meeting, which happens to be Wednesday of this week. So at least we are not much pressured by time. And should there be a review that we need to do regarding a lesson, then we could do so. Okay, let me proceed. So once again, here's another definition of research in relation to the reality that a researcher has developed. And that reality is one that will be proven through collected data, presented data, analyzed, and interpreted data. This definition is still found in your module. This is actually found below that oblique diagram which corresponds to the research process. Okay, let's proceed to the next slide. Wait, no wait. Alay said no wait. Yes, Alay. Any question, Alay? To those who have not seen this definition in the module, you look at module 1 and there's an oblique there. There's an oblique that shows the research process in its 6 stages. And then that definition is found below that oblique. Okay. But I think Mark is also trying to copy it. And that's actually good. Copying or writing something down will reinforce your familiarity of the idea behind a particular term. Mark, shall we proceed now to the next slide? Also giving an idea of Robert Brown that the cell really has another organelles within and interpretation. I'll just have to mute you, Mark, ha? Maybe someone from your house, Mark, could come to school by next week, could come to school earlier, sometime at 7:30 to 8:30, for you to have a copy of the modules for the week already. So that when discussions come, especially that I have a class with you, I'd like to request this as well to everyone. Ha? I hope that someone already comes from your household here to school on a Monday to get the module so that when discussions are to be done, like now, anything that I'll say will not have to take time in you being for you writing them down because again the module already contains supposedly those statements. Okay, wait. Am I clicking on this? There. Next. Stages in research. So here's the Mark, as for this diagram, Mark, you don't have to draw this diagram because this diagram is also found in your module. And it would really take you so much time if you have to copy everything here. Don't worry, when you receive the copy from the person who will come to school today from your house, you will already find everything there. So again, you don't have to copy everything. You might want to take down notes on important points, only on important points. So here are the 6 stages in research. The research process can be divided into 6 stages. Usually, for someone who's trying to do research for the first time, or if it is the first time that the research of that particular topic or problem is done, it begins with the planning stage. And in the planning stage, at least 5 things can happen. First, the researcher tries to identify an area or topic for inquiry. It always begins there. What is that researcher trying to solve? In what area, in what field, in what in what domain would that person wish to do a research? Will it be in the field of teaching, education? Will it be in the field of the sciences? Will it be about physics? Will it be anything that concerns society? It always starts from there. The student or the researcher might have to go out to the community to understand what's worth studying. So this one revolves around this stage revolves on the idea of what is to be studied. And then there's an identification of possible information sources. Once someone decides to study on a particular field or area, that researcher has to also make sure that there is a good pool of sources of information that could be used to supplement the research that he or she is doing. It would really be, I'm not saying that it can't be done, but it would really be a challenge if that area doesn't have so many literature to refer to. Literatures in research are really significant because they reinforce the reason for the conduct of the research. These literatures, these sources provide a good backbone on why that research could actually proceed. Once all of these have been achieved, once all of these have been done, the researcher proceeds with the retrieving stage. Selection of relevant information are evaluated. The plan for the inquiry will be evaluated and reviewed. All of those will be done in the retrieving stage. Right after the retrieving stage, the researcher proceeds with the processing stage. There is now a recording of information here. Connections and inferences are being made as well. From the processing stage, the researcher proceeds with the creating stage. Information is organized. A product might even have to be created. The product of your research could be something that is tangible, like you might want to create a tangible output. Maybe you're trying to create like what the grade 12 students did last year, what some of my research students in HNU did before. They created a tangible output, like some of them created blocks, some of them created bricks. Raisa created a brick, Lexinef created a block. Or you might do what Nicole Golosino did. She did a research and the output of which is an analysis of customers' preferences. Therefore, the output is not tangible. It's an abstract output, but it's one that can really be understood and is supposed to be used by any business. So when we do research, we do not oblige ourselves to always create a product or an output that should be tangible. That is not the requirement in research. In fact, in relation to one of the definitions earlier, research would allow you to re-establish a known fact or truth. Perhaps, take for instance, there was a study before that tried to determine how someone's academic performance or grade is affected by his or her attitude towards a subject. As it turns out, in that year, students who have good attitudes towards a subject would end up having good grades. You want to know how truthful that result is to the present batch. And so what you did was to do more or less the same research, but with a different group of people now. This is where the replicability of research could come in. We would be allowed to replicate research, but we should not duplicate a research. Anyway, I'll explain later on what the difference is between replication and duplication of researches. The discussion I provided, the explanation I provided was to support once again the idea that what we create in research is not always something that should be tangible. Ideas can also be crafted. Sharing is the fifth stage. That information that you will have organized which yielded a created product or output needs to be shared. You need to share your research. If you do not share your research for people to read and understand, expect your research is useless. Research, once shared, as much as possible, would lead to a publication. That more or less serves as the paramount goal of any writer, not just any researcher, but any writer, to have his or her name published in relation to the write-up that he or she has made. As for research, a published research is one that is meant to really help people in the research community. Also, by the time you have continued on the context of publication, once you have stepped into the context of publication, you will have created a name for yourself. That name is what researchers are also clamoring for. Researchers are after of their names being acknowledged in the research community. I tell you, it's a different story if you have already established your integrity as a researcher. If you are a researcher who just makes works without publishing them, well, you might have made a number of papers, but it's still an entirely different story if your name has already been listed as one of those who have created an impact in the research community. Lastly, right after the sharing stage, people will evaluate your work. They will look at your product and evaluate it. They will review and perhaps revise your inquiry method. If they find that your paper is in need of improvements, they might improve your inquiry method. And this is what makes a good research. It's one that will not end just there and then. That is why, once again, if you look at this diagram is like an oblique. It's actually a circle, but because of the size of the slide, it became an oval. This circular, because at least that's an adjective, this circular or oblique diagram of the research process tells us of how research works in a cycle. When people evaluate the research product or output, that evaluation could yield another research. Why? They realize, what if someone created a cement block, a concrete block or a concrete brick, and that concrete brick has been proven to still have weaknesses. Then came another researcher. The researcher will put another feature in that brick that will make it stronger than the previous one. And to test the strength of that stronger brick, it will be put to a test. And that is now within another research. See? And the process goes on and on and on. Thus, the 6 stages in research. Questions so far? Look at how invested I could get when I discuss research. This is how much I've learned to love research. Any question? Any question? Again, Mark, you don't have to copy everything here. It's all right if you don't copy this diagram, because anyway, you'll see this later on in your module when you already get a copy of your module.
The reproductive system showcases how the cell division.
So I'll proceed to the next slide.
Which we will discuss in our
the characteristics of research. First is research is empirical.
Of the so-called third postulate,
Yes.
which we call omnicellula is cellulite, which means all cells.
You don't have to copy that. You don't have to copy all of that, because if you do, you'll really take so long of a time. Anyway, you'll get a copy of that diagram in the module that you'll get from the school. You'll definitely get a copy of the module. Don't worry. Okay. Let's proceed with the characteristics of research, starting with research being an empirical activity. It is empirical, obviously it is, because it is taken from experience, if not from observation. The researcher who involves him or herself in this activity learns from what experience tells him or her. The researcher goes through a particular set of experiences, and these experiences could be strong enough to drive the researcher into doing the activity. That experience could even be the reason for the choice of a research topic. That experience or that observation is probably the reason why in the many areas that surround the researcher, that area has been chosen where research will be focusing on. Second, it is logical. Research is a logical undertaking because it follows procedures and principles. Take, for instance, let me share to you the principle of parsimony. Parsimony is spelled as P-A-R-S-I-M-O-N-Y. Again, P-A-R-S-I-M-O-N-Y. That is the principle of parsimony, one of the many principles that govern the concept of research. What does the principle of parsimony tell us? The principle of parsimony reminds us that research is and will never be a contest of length. This is just me paraphrasing. I'm paraphrasing everything. That's not what the principle really said, but that's what I understood from the principle. The principle of parsimony shows that research is not a contest of length. Research wouldn't be good. It's not good just because it is thick. The thickness or the thinness of the write up is not an assurance of how good the research is. It's just purely correlational or coincidental that there are a number of researches out there which are deemed to be good and are also thick as well. But the length is not always a requirement for you to have a good research paper. In fact, according to the principle of parsimony, the shorter the research paper is, the more comprehensive it becomes. But then again, there just may be some special cases where the research has to be well elaborated. And you know what that means. It just might have a length different from the usual short version length of any research. Diba? Another principle, the principle of generalizability. We'll have, no, not general, because not that. The principle of beneficence. Let's just go with this. The principle of beneficence. 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 Don't worry, we'll have the other principles. I'm just speaking out principles I could think of. The principle of beneficence tells us that when people do research, it is in the presumption that it will be of benefit to several or some important sectors where that research problem highly concerns itself with. For instance, if you want to do a research where you are trying to create a vaccine, vaccines are products of researches. If you want to do a research that wants to create a vaccine, then definitely your research is going to benefit the medical community and also the population who will be using that vaccine. Diba? The principle of beneficence. And again, these two principles are just part of what makes research logical. Also, let's not forget, research being logical tells us again of how systematic it is. There's a system that we follow in research. There's a set of procedures that we subscribe to in the doing of research. Also, research is cyclical. Remember the stages in the research process? That proves how cyclical research is. It starts with a problem and ends with a problem. Take for instance, let's go to that example earlier about the brick or the block. You wanted, at the very start, researcher A wanted to create a brick or a block. At the end of the research of researcher A, he was able to create a brick. But researcher B found out that that brick has weaknesses. And so researcher B wants to improve it. So the output of researcher A now becomes the problem of researcher B. And what if here comes researcher C? Researcher C realized that the modified brick of researcher B still has weaknesses. And so researcher C would make the output of researcher B now his problem. And the process goes on and on. Sir, when will this stop? If no one decides to keep on improving, if the decision to improve on one matter has ended, then it has stopped temporarily. Let me use the word temporarily. Because again, what if there comes a time that one researcher out there decides, I'll try to improve what person C now made. And so the process proceeds. The cyclical characteristic of research. Let's now proceed to the fourth characteristic, analytical. There are definitely analytical procedures involved in the gathering of the data. When people decide, or when a researcher decides on what procedure to follow, it is not just a mere product of guessing. The decision on what procedures to take, the decision on what design to follow for research is a product of analysis. It's not by mere random decision. When someone says, I'll take on a quantitative research, I'll do a survey for this, it is because it is that method that best fits the intent of the research. Not that I'll do surveys because I just felt like doing one. That's not the mindset. That should not be the mindset of a researcher. When a researcher says, I'll do a correlational research, it is because that's the design that best fits the setup. Next, it is critical, definitely. There is a particular judgment that we make in research. The judgment on how good our product is or our decision is. That is why we need to be extra careful and precise with our judgment when we do research. It is also methodical because of the systematic method and procedures that we follow in research. And lastly, research applies replicability. Research is replicable, which means that we may repeat what the procedures are of another research, but we do not duplicate that old research. Here's where I'll set the distinction between duplication and replication. A duplicated research does not yield anything new or is in no way different from the previous research. That's a duplicated research. A replicated research is one that yields something new or has incorporated something which we could not find from a previous research. Example, Leija is the let's use two students here, Naika and Leija. Leija did a research in 2020. Let's assume that Leija's research then was to create a brick. Why am I stuck with the brick research? Let it be. Brick. And then Leija's brick incorporated plastics. And then came Nika. In 2021, Nika decided to still create a brick because she referred to the work of Leija. But Nika eventually decided, I will not use plastics. This time, I will use glass, broken glass. What Nika did is replicating Leija's research. Why? Nika is going to consider the procedures that Leija did in 2020. But since Nika is using broken glass now and not plastics, she is not duplicating Leija's work. She is replicating something from Leija's research. Thus, replication, not duplication. Any question regarding the characteristics of research? Time check, it's already 3:31. I'll stop the presentation of the screen. Do we have some questions, grade 11? How's research so far? It's all right pa. We can do this. Fighting in research. Fighting in research. Take note, people, we are still in the input on what qualitative research, on what research is. This is not yet qualitative research as itself. For a while, Mark, I'll put you on mute, Mark. Here's a question from Alay. The question from Alay is, Sir, when will we have the groupings? As of this time, Alay, I could not yet give you your groupings because I am not yet sure of the exact number of students enrolled in this class. Perhaps by the end of this week, if not by Monday of next week, we will already have our final groupings. Because as of this time, the student participants has reached 19 or 18 because there are accounts that have duplicated names because maybe with the audio, I'm not sure. So anyway, once the master list is available, we'll do the groupings. But I tell you, don't worry. PR1 and PR2 will be done in groups, which means that there's a different style in doing research in grade 12. For now, if there are no other concerns, we'll do the continuation of this on Wednesday. The continuation of the discussion will be done on Wednesday. And for that, that will be all for this afternoon. Goodbye and thank you, grade 11. Goodbye.
activity 1, 2, and 3 on this, and then the second page of your, and the third page of your module.